Hi there, this is Fixed It. Having successfully torn down my Anki Cozmo, I now need to remove the battery. Virtually all of the new robots I work with and repair have a battery clip on the motherboard, so replacing the battery is quite often quite straightforward. You unclip the battery and then you clip in a new battery. For some reason Anki decided to solder the wires of the battery direct to the motherboard. This makes it a difficult task to remove and also a precarious task. As always, you copy this video at your own risk. So let's begin. I'll start by desoldering the red lead. It's a little tricky because it's very tight on the board, so I'm applying sideways pressure while pulling from the side. You have to be careful with it when pulling because it does get jammed underneath the plastic bit, and when it comes out you mustn't let it touch any of the other components. Okay, it's desoldered, and now what I want to do is I want to lift the red lead up, so get some tape and then completely seal off the end of the red, the positive. Make sure it's completely enclosed, and the reason for doing that is if that lead was to touch any of these other components, it will completely destroy it because there'll still be some residual charge in the battery and it'll just cause a short circuit. Once you seal off the end, then you can go ahead and you can take the black lead off in the same manner. This is certainly one of the trickiest battery leads I've had to remove. Having cleaned and tinned the end of the soldering iron again, I've then applied it to the black lead, and that one's come off quite quickly. We don't have to worry about that one because the positive is still covered. And now the lithium ion battery is released and you can gently pull that out of the plastic. It is a little bit tricky, the reason being it has a piece of rubber on the back of it which catches, and if I flip it over you can see it. What you'll need to do is to remove that piece of rubber because you're going to want to apply that to your next battery when you put it in there, because there are tiny little resistors and transistors underneath the black plastic and you don't want the case shorting out. As you can see, this is a 3.7 volt battery, 220 milliamp hours, and the one I'm going to replace it with is a 600 milliamp hours battery, which should basically last twice as long. Once you've removed the battery leads, you need to suck up the old solder from the positive and negative points and then re-tin those 2 points ready for attaching the new wires. Here's a tip for you: if you have one of these solder suckers, which you need to do soldering, get a piece of heat resistant piping and put it over the end because it makes for a flexible end and it makes it easier to desolder in difficult places. You have to be very careful with this. I've got a very fine tip with a drop of solder on it. I need to get that heated and then suck the solder up. Once you've done that, you need to tin the end of the soldering iron and then apply a very small amount of solder to that point and do it quickly so that you end up with a nice shiny blob. There we go, that's ready for wiring too. So that's the positive done. Now I just need to do the negative connection. It's really hard to get a good camera angle and do the soldering whilst trying not to desolder other components on the board. You may have noticed that as soon as you do it, the solder joint goes white. This is known as a dry joint. It's because there's no flux left in the solder and it makes a very bad connection. And dry joints are one of the biggest causes of electronics failure. Wet the soldering iron tip and flow some new solder and flux onto the positive terminal. So if I spin this round, you can see that we've got two very clean and well soldered joints ready for the new positive and negative lead to the battery. Having removed the old LiPo battery, I'm going to replace it with one of these 500 milliamp hour batteries that I got from China some time ago for my Sphero SPRK Plus and Sphero 2 robots. Although these are smaller and fatter than the original battery, as long as they will actually go in the compartment inside Cozmo, then there's no reason not to use them. As you can see, it's a little bit of a tight fit, but as long as the plastic wings and the base of Cozmo go in place, then I think it's going to close up without any difficulties, although you wouldn't think it from watching me do it. And all the pushing and shoving I'm doing is very gentle, just to make sure that it fits in there securely and snugly, but not too tight. But that looks good to me. Okay, so I've got to pass the battery positive through this little hole under it. Easier said than done. There we go. And now what I want to do is to just put a bit of tape over the top of that, just to make sure it doesn't contact anything, and hopefully that'll also stop it slipping back through when I try and do, yeah, it should, when I try and put the negative on. And it needs to go this way through, so it's going to be a bit tricky, to say the least. Maybe better is if I swap this onto the other side. Okay, so swap that to the other side. And now I need to swing this round like this. And I need to get that through that other hole. Okay, so, okay, can I get that through there? Which is proving to be somewhat difficult. Come on, you bugger. Damn, that thing fell off the end. This is pretty tricky. Again, another notion of nobody but the company will repair these. And then unfortunately the company goes bust. So that turns in very rapidly into nobody can repair these unless people like me and my friends come along and decide we're going to do this ourselves. Right, so that's got that on there. Now what I need to do is to swing that around in a loop and attach it to that point. It always looks incredibly easy when you're watching a short, very heavily edited video, because it looks like everything just slots together without any trouble at all, but that's rarely the case. And it always makes me laugh when I get a comment like, this is a 6-minute video and it could have been 2 minutes, I don't know what all the talking was about, why didn't you just show us what to do? Well, in reality there's a lot more than 6 minutes gone into making the video. The soldering and desoldering takes a huge amount of time if you want to do it properly, and quite often people like me end up destroying several of these things in learning the process of actually fixing them, but nobody sees that. You'll also note that I'm replacing the negative, the black lead, first. It's important that you always do this when you're putting something back together. Never replace the positive first, because when you attach the negative you can get a huge surge from the positive side of the battery onto your soldering iron, which can end up destroying the thing you're trying to fix. So attach the negative and then attach the positive. Now, before untaping the positive lead and increasing the risk of it touching the motherboard and destroying it, I've actually put a piece of tape across the motherboard on top of all of the components, so that there's no chance of me accidentally touching any of those with the positive lead as I try to solder it in place. What's interesting is you can tell that Anki were never expecting these devices to be opened and the battery to be changed. Most manufacturers put a small socket onto the motherboard and then use a plug to plug the battery in. However, I've noticed on this that the positive and the negatives are completely different sides of the motherboard, which is very unusual because people generally, including myself when I'm designing printed circuit boards, you keep the two of them quite close together, making it easy to connect to, so that you can easily detach the battery and clip in a new one. Whereas Anki's gone for this difficult soldering of the battery onto the motherboard and the consequent risks of it being damaged whilst the battery is being changed. So they never ever really wanted people to go inside these devices. Well, that's the battery in place. I think I'm going to keep this piece of tape on here, although I'll just tidy it up a little bit, as that's a brand new battery that's in there. I'm going to need to recharge it once I've put the unit back together and make sure it's got a full charge before continuing. But that concludes the battery installation video. What I plan to do in part 3 is to put the Anki Cozmo back together in all its magnificent bits, which isn't quite as simple as you might imagine. And so make sure you subscribe to the channel in order to get be informed of when the next video is available, and check out my other robot and other videos. I hope you like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.